Maintaining Dignity. Written and read by TARDIS 9. Based on the railway series by the Reverend Wilbert Awdry and the television series by Britt Allcroft and David Mitton. A few years had passed since Percy arrived on the Farquhar branch. Nationalisation had begun in earnest, and more visitors from the other railway came to Sodor. Passenger traffic was again picking up, as more tourists began to return to the island. With the boat from Alsborough to the mainland discontinued, more people arrived on the island via the Fat Controllers Railway. At that time, Percy had been working mainly on goods and mail trains, and Duck had taken over his duties as station pilot in the yards. One morning, the Fat Controller came to see Percy at Farquhar. He had just built up steam outside the sheds, which had since been expanded with a third berth to accommodate him, and was now simmering happily. "Your work has been good so far," the Fat Controller told him. "But now I think it's high time we tried you out on passenger traffic. I'm considering investing in a new engine specifically for these services, but with the increasing passenger numbers for this season, I'm allocating you to some of these services to help Thomas and Toby handle them until the new engine arrives."
"Oh, thank you, sir," peeped Percy.
As Thomas was busy helping to build the harbour that day, and Toby was at the quarry, Percy was to take Annie and Clarabel on his trip. He backed down onto them, slowly and gently. "Very impressive," said Annie as he buffered up to them.
"Not a single bump,"
agreed Clarabel. They knew it was Percy's first time with passengers, and promised to help him wherever they could.
"Oh, I don't need help," said Percy smugly. "I've seen the big engines pull coaches hundreds of times. It's easy."
And he brought the coaches gently to the platform. The passengers crowded around him, admiring his paintwork. "What a nice shade of green," they remarked. "It's a nice change from blue and brown all the time." Percy was flattered. To his credit, Percy made sure the journey went very smoothly. He was right on time at all the stations and kept a quick and steady speed, never bumping his train once. By the end of his last train, the passengers were singing his praises. "What a splendid engine," they said. "So gentle and efficient." This went on all week, and even the Fat Controller complimented him on his performance. "A fine piece of work," he said at the sheds one evening. "Percy, you have done well on the passenger trains. Keep it up, and I'll ensure you stay helping these services until the new engine arrives."
"Yes, sir, of course, sir. Oh, thank you, sir,"
beamed Percy. The Fat Controller smiled and walked away, his mind turning back to a new diesel rail car he had been told about by a friend on the mainland. Perhaps he could see about one of those for the branch line.
"On time and not a single complaint,"
boasted Percy in the sheds that night.
"That's why the passengers love me."
"Oh, really?" said Thomas. "I'm not so sure about that." "You can't be too careful, though," agreed Toby.
"Exactly," said Percy. "Anyone would think taking passengers is hard work."
"Oh, I never said it wasn't," warned Toby. He was about to say more, but Percy interrupted him.
"I hardly think there's much to fuss about," he said pompously. "It's all a matter of maintaining dignity. One must be punctual and efficient at all times, while appearing in a presentable state." "I wonder if it would be cold enough for a scarf tonight," said Thomas with a cheeky grin. "And perhaps we'd have something with jam on it for the morning."
Percy was indignant.
"How's the fish, Thomas?" he asked.
Thomas was cross.
"Don't go acting all high and mighty about taking passengers," he scolded. "If anything delays or upsets them, they will complain. They certainly did after your blunder with the trolley." "Oh, and what about leaving your train and your car behind? Getting fish in your water tank? running into a snowdrift and racing a bus at speed, Percy retorted. Face it, Thomas. Some of us have dignity and some of us don't.
Thomas was about to say more, but Toby shot him a warning look. Thomas relented and decided it was best to say nothing. The next evening, Percy was taking Annie and Clarabel again on their last train, while Thomas was taking some trucks to the harbour. The journey was quiet and only a handful of passengers were on board their train that evening. He met up with Henry at the junction. A small crowd of people got out of his train and boarded Annie and Clarabel. "Be careful," Henry warned. "Some of the children on my train have been behaving rather poorly." Percy could see a young family boarding his train. A little boy and girl were running across the platform with cheeky grins on their faces. The father seemed focused on getting them all on board, while the mother looked rather embarrassed. To one side, a tall blonde-haired man looked rather put out and glanced crossly at the family. "They were running about in one of my coaches," explained Henry, "and then seemed to try to dodge detection from that tall man. They even went so far as to climb on seats to stare at him before trying to duck out of sight. And all he wanted to do was to read his book. It's disgraceful. They could have hurt themselves doing that on a moving train."
"Pah!" snorted Percy. "They wouldn't dare do that with me."
"Don't say I didn't warn you," said Henry. But Percy didn't care. He simply waited until his passengers were all on board. The guard blew his whistle and waved his green flag, and Percy puffed away into the evening light. He was running nicely. The rails hummed beneath him, a slight breeze blew across his smokebox, and the dying sunset lights shone all over his boiler. He was having a grand time. "This is the way, this is the way," he hummed happily. "Nothing but the best for me and my passengers. Poor old Thomas and Toby, with no dignity to speak of. I'd feel sorry for them, but I'm much too important to stop now." But Annie and Clarabel were worried. All passenger trains have a communication cord. It is used to apply the brakes on the train if there's something wrong. Then the crew can investigate the matter and put it right. The two children were now running up and down Clarabel. "Oh, do settle down, please," begged Clarabel. "Be careful, Clarabel," warned Annie. "If they get anywhere near them..." Then there was trouble. The whole train's brakes came on sharply, and a scream could be heard inside Clarabel. The two coaches groaned to themselves as they and Percy ground to a halt just beyond the signal. Percy was indignant. "What's the matter now?" he fumed. "Can't it wait until we reach the next station? This is so undignifying." "Sorry, Percy," said the driver, "but somebody's pulled the communication cord. We'd better go and see what's wrong." Most of the passengers looked out of their windows to see what had happened. Everyone could hear a sobbing noise coming from Clarabel. The guard opened his door into her and went along her, checking all over. At last, he found the family crowding round the little girl and rubbing her head. "What's happened?" demanded the guard. The family said nothing, so Clarabel spoke up. "They were running all over me," she said. "And then the boy pulled the communication cord whilst the girl was standing on one of the seats," her passengers added. The guard frowned at the family. "I'll be informing the police of this matter," he said. "Messing around with seating and using the communication cord means a hefty fine." "My head hurts," complained the girl. "Good," came another voice. It was the tall man from earlier. "Perhaps that'll teach you two not to be so foolish as to mess about on moving trains." The children looked thoroughly ashamed of themselves at this. Percy was embarrassed. Now his train would be late. He realized just how hard it was to pull passengers after all. As soon as it was safe to proceed, he puffed quickly away, hoping no one had seen him. But he hadn't accounted for a familiar blue shape waiting at the signal behind him. The rest of the journey was difficult for Percy. He was late at the next station and had difficulty making up for lost time. He wanted to go fast, but his driver wouldn't let him. "No," he said. "What would the Fat Controller say if something else happened?" Presently, he reached for Farquhar and shunted Annie and Clarabel away before backing into the sheds. He was glad they were empty. But not for long. Thomas and Toby soon returned. They seemed to be talking about something. As they drew nearer, he discovered just what it was they were talking about. "It's all about maintaining dignity, isn't it, Thomas?" asked Toby.
Indeed it is, Toby, Thomas chuckled. One must always be punctual and efficient at all times, while appearing in a presentable state. But then, some engines have dignity and some don't, do they, Percy?
The two of them laughed loudly at this last remark. Percy decided that discretion was the better part of valour, and concluded that the only way he had any hope of maintaining dignity was to say nothing at all.